Well, we are back here on a Sunday morning, and the week ahead features a new winter storm that'll be developing in the Rockies, and it will gradually spread its way eastward into the plains and Great Lakes, and eventually into the interior Northeast. We're going to talk about that. A lot of things going on in the long range that everyone seems to be discussing this morning on the chat board already, so we'll get into all of that and more on this Sunday morning Joe and Joe Weather Show, brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware at 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon, New York, serving the entire New York, New Jersey, Connecticut tri-state area with everything you need to move ahead. Soon it will be spring, and that means topsoil, sand, and mulch, among other things. And just in case we get a winter storm, there's still plenty of salt. 631-756-1125 is the telephone number. It is. And nowhere can you find better prices. The website is
OmniTrueValue.com. Good morning to you, Joe Cioffi.
Morning, Mr. Rayo. Good morning to everybody on the chat board, and good morning to those of you who are lurking about on the background on the Joe and Joe Weather Show. It's our Sunday morning, 11 a.m. Broadcast, and the Joe and Joe Weather Show is on Monday through Thursday at 7:35 Eastern Time, most of the time. Fridays and Saturdays, Joe and I take time off, and then Sunday, back at 11 a.m. Although if there's something going on a Friday or Saturday, we will, of course, jump on and do something. You know, I figured it out, Joe. I figured it out. There's no coincidence over the fact that the weather has been like this, and Reuben Fairchild has completely disappeared. Although he does have an award named in his honor that we occasionally bestow upon members of the chat board when they, how shall we say, have an inappropriate conversation.
Well, yeah, it's been about a year now, right? He vanished into the great beyond. Mr. Reuben Fairchild.
Mr. Reuben Fairchild, we should say, yes.
It was about a year ago, wasn't it? Or maybe it was a little bit more than a year. But I'm still reeling from not reeling, but I'm still shaking my head over Thursday. Thursday, temperatures throughout the region within a few degrees of 70 in the middle part of February. It's absolutely amazing. And
this
is
the time of year where it's always wise in cases where you've got any kind of a west or a southwest wind and you're going to have a decent amount of sunshine. I mean, it happened even on Wednesday. We saw temperatures that made it up to 70 in a few places. It's always best to go above the guidance.
It is. And I'll tell you how, shocked or quiet a lot of people are. I mean, Dr. Judah Cohen has not posted anything on Twitter in 2 days. The last thing that he posted 2 days ago, he was looking at the GFS 500 millibar pattern, stating, "Greenland blocking. Is that really you? Winter's in the news of your demise premature? At least the GFS is drinking the sudden stratospheric warming Kool-Aid. Can winter snatch victory from the jaws of defeat? Obviously, plenty of time for this to and not to happen. Let the games begin." And we'll, of course, later in the show, when we start talking about long range, we'll talk about whether or not there is indeed some sort of block trying to increase over Greenland, which might be a signal or a sign that maybe March might be quite unlike January and February. For all of you winter weather lovers, you better hope so.
Well, it also doesn't necessarily mean any. We could have the stratospheric warming event has gotten underway, and it creates, at least according to a series of model runs that I looked at, it does pretty much destroy the polar vortex probably a good month before we've seen it get destroyed in other winters, because ultimately it gets destroyed. Whether it happens now or whether it happens in April, it goes away. That's how we make the process of going from winter to spring and from spring to summer. I just don't. I just continue to say that all of this could happen, and for snow lovers, it could still be a sucky pattern. So you don't know where this is all going to wind up. I suppose you could look at this also and say the pattern is going to be better than what it was, which is, just sort of like saying, well, the probability of something happening is not zero. So,
Yeah.
there's I just think the last 2 months have just pretty much decimated any layer of confidence that anyone would have. And I'm going to also, since it's Sunday morning, I've got to rant about something. Uh, the folks on the chat board, I know everybody looks at models, everybody looks at what's online, everybody sees, snow maps, and people have been posting up snow maps uh, now saying winter's not done, blah blah blah. So here's what I would say. I would say if you're putting up snow maps with no context, and let's just say that one of those events that models have been putting up on the table winds up happening, your forecast skill, in my opinion, is still zero. Okay, because broken traditional clocks are right twice a day. Military clocks are only right once a day. Greenwich Mean Time is always right. But my point is, I could just envision it. Somebody would have put up one of those snow maps, and then if that event were to happen, they'd come back and say, "Wow, what a great forecaster I am that I talked about this 10 days ago or 7 days ago." No, you're not. Okay, if you throw something at a wall that's wet, eventually something's going to stick. And so I'm just pointing out that if you think that that's an excuse for you to put down that you're a great forecaster because you put up a snow map 10 days before, 7 days before, and it wound up coming true, you're not. And that's my rant for the day.
And there it is, ladies and gentlemen, the rant of the day. You know what? We ought to make
The rant of the day is brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware.
We're going to make this a kind of a traditional thing where we have this once a week on Sunday, and which Joe is going to rant today? That kind of stuff. But I agree with you. I agree with you. A broken clock is usually right twice a day, and whether or not if you just keep, it's like Gene Dixon. Those of you of a certain age may remember there was a psychic, popular celebrity psychic on TV and radio, Gene Dixon, who would make literally hundreds of predictions. And if one of them actually came true, he would forget all the ones that she didn't get correctly and point to that one and say, "You see, I predicted that. And that's why you should listen to my predictions." So that's the way it's been going for some.
Yep. I'm kind of fascinated by this storm system that's setting up in the west, in the northern Rockies, because, well, northern and central Rockies, and it's going to extend through the plains and eventually into the Great Lakes. It's just like this gigantic east-west flow, east to west flow, and upslope. And of course, you're going to have pressures falling out there with a low that's going to develop. But it's kind of interesting to see the extent of how this is going to cover a lot of geography. I don't know if it's going to mean a ton of snow, but it's just a you know it's just an interesting setup there that they see out in the western part of the U.S. with this.
Yeah, yeah. What would you call it? An Alberta Clipper or a Saskatchewan Screamer?
I don't think you could really call it anything like that, because
Yeah.
it's this long fetch of easterly winds with actually some reasonably cold Arctic air that's involved, and it's a bunch of states. I mean, look at this. I'm going to just look at the snowfall. I'm going to put it up on the screen now so you can take a look. I just pulled up the snowfall forecast map, which takes you through Wednesday morning, and uh, this is all pretty much from one system, really, that this is going to be produced, and these numbers are early in the game. But hold on, sorry, Joe, just give me a second here. When I don't do the show for 3 days, my switching capabilities is slowed. So yeah, take a look at this. Like it's this. Look at the amount of geography that this covers, and it's all for a lot of these areas. It's some of this area. It's all going to be happening around the same time over the next few days.
I mean, look at all those 4, 5s, and 6s on the map, far, far away from the storm center itself.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. This is kind of a. I'm going to be curious to see how this is all going to play out. I can't seem to find. Where's my where's the map? Oh, that's why. Okay, so there you go. I'm looking at some of these numbers here. Yeah, you're right. 5, 6s, 7s, 4s across Minnesota. There's a couple of 9s and 10s there. You've got Western Colorado, which Ruthless Goat, who I don't think is on the board this morning, pointed out in a comment that he sent that I saw him make. It's been such a gangbusters year for the Colorado Rockies. They've done really well with this, particularly as you go more toward the northwestern part of the state. But big snows in western Wyoming. They got the yellows up there, Joe. That's 30 inches plus in some of the higher ranges. Also in western Montana, northern Idaho, just getting clobbered. The Cascades doing well in Washington State, and there's even snow being indicated for the coastal range again in Washington, Oregon, and down into Northern California. And the southern edge of this goes down into Nevada, into Utah. So it's a pretty interesting setup. And again, we'll probably see those numbers pick up to the west. Right now, we have winter weather advisories. As some of what's going on there on the maps is happening now. We've got winter weather advisories in northeastern North Dakota and northern Minnesota. We have the first winter storm watches and winter storm warnings up for Montana and western Wyoming. There are probably going to be more to come. Winter storm warnings in the Cascades and Washington. A lot of wind down in the southwest and southern Nevada. They're blowing away there. High wind warnings into Southern California interior there, and also into northwestern Arizona. Meanwhile, in the east, it's nice and quiet and calm. We also have, by the way, flood watches up and some high wind warnings up for the Big Island of Hawaii.
Well, they always, at this particular time of the year, occasionally they are subjected to what are called Kona storms, which can produce. And it's interesting to live on the Big Island. You could be down at the beaches and have temperatures in the 70s to around 80. And meantime, of course, the volcanic peaks, Mauna Loa, Mauna Kea, at the top, they could have blizzard conditions with sub-freezing or even near zero temperatures. So that's probably one of the most interesting areas of the world, because you can have so much happening in such a small stretch of real estate on the Big Island. So and of course, don't go. People say, "Oh, we're going to Hawaii. We're going to Hawaii for a vacation." They go in January or February, and occasionally they end up with just what we're about to see now. I mean, some kind of a storm moving on slowly past them and bringing them nothing but clouds and wind and misery. Renata and I were in Oahu, Honolulu, in March.
Honolulu, land of Goshen.
We were there in March of 2016, and it was hard. We actually said in the aftermath we thought it was much nicer up in Anchorage. We had gone from Alaska to Hawaii, and we thought it was better in Anchorage, where they had hardly any wind. Temperatures were in the 30s to near 40. We went to Oahu. There was like winds every single day, 30, 40 mile per hour gusts from some kind of an offshore disturbance. And it was in the, near 70. It felt more like the 50s with the wind. And, in our hotel room, the door kept slamming shut because of the high winds that were blowing throughout the room and throughout the corridors of the hotel. I mean, if you're going to take a vacation, don't go to Hawaii in the wintertime, because you may be very sadly disappointed.
Yes. Since we're talking about snow, I figured let's do the snowfall forecast map here. And this is for the 72-hour period that takes us from this morning to Wednesday morning. And it looks like if you draw a line around, say, 42 and a half degrees north and take it almost straight west into Nebraska and then dip it southwestward a little bit as you move through the Southwest, that's a pretty large chunk of the U.S. Where we see the probability of at least two at 95 to 100%. Of course, we're not seeing too much of that in the Northeast through Wednesday morning. Just a small patch up in the Adirondacks and in northern Vermont, New Hampshire, but back over the Upper Peninsula of Michigan through Wisconsin, Minnesota, both Dakotas, everybody's 50% or higher. Then, of course, you get into the Rockies. It extends further south from there. See what the probability of at least 8 is in the west, and we won't even bother to look in the east. But in the west, western Wyoming into Montana, western Montana into Idaho, the Cascades, probability of 8. I'll jump to 18. And we even have these pockets here where we've got those small. I'd love to live in one of those. Well, I wouldn't love to live there. Let's say I would love to visit. Okay, I'd love to visit maybe one of those spots there, Joe, that has an 80% probability or higher of at least 18. Should I take a look at 30? Why not?
30 inches of snow, ladies
Right.
and gentlemen. Yes.
There you go, Northwest Montana. There's a nice little spot there in Northwest Montana that's has, and also up in the Cascades, where we're in Washington State, east of Seattle, where we have 50% or higher probability of at least 30 inches of snow. Now, today, Joe, on WPC, WPC's long range. Okay, we haven't seen this for the better part of a month and a half. So here's the probability. Now, this is the probability for at least a few inches for starting from Wednesday into Thursday, and that red area is 90% in South Dakota, northern Nebraska, southern Minnesota, and in and around the Green Bay area, and a large area in the lighter blue that is 70 to 90% for at least a few inches, and that actually extends into upstate New York from I-90 northward. They've got 30 to 50%, Joe, a little bit further to the south, and they've got the southern edge of 10 to 30 to northern New Jersey, the northern half of Pennsylvania, Connecticut, Rhode Island, southeastern New England, and just north of New York City. I don't know. We'll see. This is for Wednesday into Thursday. Then we go Thursday into Friday, and the western storm system now moving east, so the higher probabilities for at least a few inches. Again, north of I-90, got 10, 30 to 50 down to Boston, and 70 to 90% across Maine, also on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Friday into Saturday, we don't have other than a few patches there in central PA and into Wisconsin. And this is with the next system, the system behind that, which is going to be on the weaker side. But here you go, folks. Saturday into Sunday, WPC has much of central and eastern PA, most of New Jersey except the south, northern Maryland, north and east at 10, and Long Island also at 10 to 30% probability for at least a few. And in the darker greens, you're in 30 to 50%.
30 to 50.
And northernmost New Jersey, 30 to 50. This is colossal. This is insane. This is unprecedented in this particular winter we've had. And of course, they put this forecast out at a little bit before midnight last night, and naturally the 6Z GFS had to come and show absolutely nothing for Saturday into Sunday. So I'm waiting to see. The new GFS is rolling even as we speak, so I'm waiting to see. So first things first, I just want to go back to Wednesday, because it does look like we're going to have some kind of warm front that's going to set up to our south. And since we have enough of it, I might as well bring it up on the map here. We'll bring up the GFS to do things a little bit out of order on this President's Day.
Meanwhile,
And
take a look at that. Take a look at that. There's the block that Dr. Cohen was talking about over Greenland.
yes, yeah, no, yeah, and that I'm going to save that. We'll talk about that.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that shortly. So let's go to the probability. Let's go to the GFS, which is out to 96 hours. So that at least will take us into Wednesday. So no issues. Obviously, when you look at this map, there isn't a drop of precip going on anywhere east of the Rockies right now. So we'll move this along. There's a little bit of coastal moisture that forms. I'm not sure out of what for overnight into Monday, but that goes out to the east, and they've got a little rain there in southeastern New England tomorrow. But I don't think tomorrow's going to be anything special. There's a weak cold front that's coming through. I didn't put in any showers, although I suppose it's possible that there might be a shower that comes out of this. And then that goes out. Then there's actually a second stronger front, slightly stronger front on Tuesday, which I think will probably produce a couple of showers. So both Monday and Tuesday are warm. You start to see the low that's coming out from in the west. It's forming down in southern Colorado and all those easterly isobars from Minnesota eastward, southern Minnesota into the Dakotas. Meanwhile, this system in this front in the northeast moves in. Now, there's a warm front that's going to be setting up on Wednesday from that low in southern Colorado. It's the famous 1,000-mile warm front that I remember. I talked about how back last year, I think it was, or whenever it was, a couple of years ago, where the model in the long range had this sort of 1,000-mile warm front. This is kind of what you're seeing here. Tuesday's front's going to stall to the south, and there's going to be a little bit of cold air bleeding southward from the higher pressures to the north that are sort of enveloping around all this. So, and I was actually a little bit surprised that the model's actually picking up on the idea that maybe there could be some icing in northern Pennsylvania and northern New Jersey. GFS is doing a job here, putting you in some ice there Wednesday night. And I did notice, by the way, be very careful when you look at these maps with temperatures. So the Wednesday high temperature map, I'll bring that up, and we'll take a look at that. So this is the Wednesday. This will be the Wednesday high temperature map once it's done loading. I just wish the Weather Service had slightly faster servers with this, because it sometimes takes a lot of time. Okay, so you look at these numbers, and it hasn't gotten rid of the snow up there in the blue. So these high temperatures here are all low in the mid 40s. So you ask yourself, you look at this and say, well, how are they? This is the high temperature for Wednesday. This is going to probably be left over from Tuesday night, because when I looked at the actual temperature, because if you go on the digitalweather.gov, if you go on temperature, you can pull up, at least when you go to the long range, it's only every 6 hours. But if you pull up the 7 p.m. temperature for Wednesday, which it's still loading, folks, but you can see the highs, low and mid 40s. Loading.
Sometimes the surface temperature can be in the 40s, but just a little ways aloft, it could be quite cold
Right.
enough to support freezing. And case in point, we were coming back, Renan and I were coming back from central New Jersey, Freehold, New Jersey on Friday. And we were driving, we just dropped off my sister in the Bronx. And as we were getting back in our car, our SUV, we began to encounter sleet.
Yeah,
Now the temperature.
A lot of people did, Joe. A lot of people reported sleet.
But the interesting thing is that we were listening to WCBS News Radio. This is not a knock on Craig Allen, because Craig has enough to do, juggling all kinds of stuff, doing the weather on News Radio 880. But I mean, I'm sure he was looking at the temperatures and seeing temperatures were in the low and mid 40s. My car was saying it was 43 degrees, and so he's coming on the air and he's saying, and places well to the north and west, up in northwestern corner of New Jersey, or up in portions of the Hudson Valley north of Interstate 84, you just might see a little bit of sleet or ice mixing in. And I'm saying somebody ought to tell him that it's happening right in New York City. And after he said that, they did a story about someplace in Manhattan, and the reporter there was saying not only is the tragedy that just happened here, but now it's beginning to hail. He said hail, not sleet. And I said it was all over the tri-state. But yet again, you look at the temperatures and you say, there's no way we're going to have any frozen precip. And yet it was in the mid and low 40s, and there was widespread sleet or ice falling with the rain Friday afternoon. And this came on the heels of temperatures just a few hours earlier that were in the 60s, and then the day before was at around 70. Crazy weather. So now we're looking ahead to this week and wondering whether or not we'll see any kind of freezing precipitation, even though the temperatures are being indicated again to be mostly in the 40s.
Well, those again will be early in the day, because I had the 7 p.m. temperature map up, and it has mid and upper 30s. And then at 1 a.m. Thursday, it actually has some 33s in the Hudson Valley north of 84 and in northwest New Jersey and into parts of northeastern PA. I think this could be one of those instances where, with the warm front setting up a little bit further to the south, that it maybe a little bit more cold air will bleed down than you think. And that's something that you're not going to really know today.
No.
We'll probably have a better handle on this on Thursday, because that is Arctic air that's up there, and the weight of that Arctic air can sometimes overwhelm a bit further south than you might imagine. So I think that's something we'll have to at least watch.
Yes.
In a winter where we haven't had to watch much. That low will eventually, the warm front will try to make its way northward. And this is Thursday morning, Joe. They're still showing, the GFS still shows ice in northeastern PA, northwest New Jersey, and in the HV north of 84, or maybe somewhere between 287 and 84, and in Connecticut and Massachusetts. I mean, this is at least implying that there could be a fairly substantial icing event in the interior areas north and west of the coast come late Wednesday night into Thursday morning. It's actually, I also think this is a little bit of a colder run than the prior run. The low goes out, and then of course the next battle is going to be Thursday in terms of temperatures. And I'm going to bring up the temperature map for Thursday, because Thursday is going to be one of those days that you see a lot in the springtime, where it's going to be in the upper 60s and low 70s in southern New Jersey, southern Pennsylvania, down into Maryland, and even middle and upper 70s probably in northeastern Virginia. Meanwhile, north of that warm front, and the way they've got the temperature here on the temperatures progged on the digital map, Joe, would suggest that the warm front never makes it to northern New Jersey or New York City. It's in the upper 30s and low 40s in all of New England, low 30s as you go even further north. It's 40s on Long Island. It's only near 50 in New York. So this is going to be one of those days where, you're going to hear about, say, New York City maybe not getting out of the 40s and Atlantic City going to 70 or even low 70s down in South Jersey. So that'll take care of that. This low is going to go out, okay, obviously. Friday.
And the cold air damming would be even more pronounced if there was just some snow, some significant snows up over upstate New York and New England, but there isn't. But this is all doing it based surely on the weight
of the cold
that
air.
Very cold air the cold air.
No question. The low goes out, and by the way, you could see the cold air damming. This is Wednesday night. The isobars kind of get hairpinned here down into from New York City down into southern New Jersey, southeastern PA. That's the cold air trying to wedge its way southward. Then this goes out, obviously. Again, Thursday is going to be one of those crazy, weird days. Eventually, winds are going to turn northwest. A front's going to go by Thursday night. We start to turn colder because there is a cold high. Part of that cold air comes down. Nowhere near as cold as what some of the models were showing late last week. Now, there's been a number of runs trying to show something coming up out of the Tennessee Valley, some moisture there back into Arkansas, and then some kind of low that moves across the northern Great Lakes. And you see it here by Saturday afternoon. There's this sort of narrow east-west band of rain, right cutting across 35 degrees north and going further to the west. And this is as far out as we have so far.
And
But
you see that for the people who are snow lovers or winter weather lovers, again, the high takes the wrong. I mean, you want to see the high moving northeast across New England. Instead, what does it do? It slides off into the Atlantic, puts us in a a southwesterly flow. So yeah, there may be some low-level cold air initially, but with that type of a flow, Joe, we won't be able to hold on to the cold air for very long.
right, the high actually goes into New England briefly Saturday morning. And if it were to hold there, we might be having a different conversation. But yeah, it then reforms south of Long Island, and by Saturday evening, it's somewhere closer to Bermuda than anything else. And
Yeah.
it now appears that unlike what models were showing, I'll go back to yesterday, or even last night. Last night it had this northern energy kind of being a little more important, and the high was still close enough where you would have more low-level cold air, that you'd get maybe some snow out of this. And who knows? It could have been a coating to a couple of inches. But now, if you believe what the new runs are doing, uh, and this is going off the 6Z where it made the first change. But let me bring up the 6Z run.
And I've often
And
said, and I've asked forecasters, and a lot of them say they've never really noticed the difference. But to me, if you want to look at these short-term models, the model guidance, I've always thought the 12Z was a bit more accurate as opposed to the 0Z
zero
runs.
Z.
The 0Z runs, of course, when they send the balloons up, they, especially in the summertime, they're taking into account lots of convection, a lot of thunderstorm activity boiling up. But meanwhile, the 12Z runs are based upon a more calmer, more tranquil atmosphere, and gives you a better middle of the road look at what it may happen down the road or whatever. So
You get less feedback.
right, exactly.
Um, so here the 12Z again. It's only out to 162, but it's different. The northern system doesn't it lifts way up northeast, doesn't even get involved. So it looks to me like you could pretty much, unless this is just going to come back on a subsequent run, which is always possible. But I mean, this particular run suggests that the system that the models were pointing at for this coming weekend might not happen. And you know what? That would be certainly par for the course regarding the way the winter has gone. Meanwhile, I just want to show everybody what's going on out in the West from all of this. And let's back up. I mean, there's again. I look at this and I see all this widespread snow go. Look at the easterly isobars from Nebraska on north into that cold high. I mean, the thicknesses along the Canadian border are all at 504. I mean, this is bitter cold air that's piling down into the plains and into Montana and Wyoming, and you're getting all this upslope into the Rockies. And then, of course, there's your 1,000-mile warm front for Wednesday. I guess what we could say is if you were wanted to think that maybe there's going to be an icing issue, the thing to watch to be careful to watch for is that all that cold air and high prior pressures to the north, is that going to weigh this down and force the warm front to be a little bit further south, take a little more cold air wedges in, and suggesting that maybe there could be a significant icing event for areas inland come Wednesday night into Thursday morning. I think that's a possibility here.
That would be ironic in the winter that seemingly did not exist in terms of snowfall to have, let's say, an icing event that we're alluding to for later on this upcoming week. And ice, of course, is not nice. I would prefer 6 inches of snow to a quarter of an inch of ice, but an icing event that could cause innumerable accidents and cause some real big time problems. And in the winter where up until then, seemingly there's been no real weather problems at all. So hopefully that will not come to pass, though. I mean, the last thing we need is a major icing problem for not necessarily for New York or Long Island, but up in the Hudson Valley and portions of interior Connecticut, northwestern New Jersey. So we'll keep an eye on that for you for later on this week.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about the polar vortex, and let's take a look. I've gone back to last night's 0Z run. Uh, the off-hour runs I've noticed, by the way, which usually tend to be a bit more squirrely in the long range, also are squirrely when it comes to what it shows with the vortex. So we'll stick with the 0Z run, the main cycle run. So this is where we are now on. So we're actually a stratospheric warming event, I believe, from the folks that I've seen on Twitter that follow this have dated it as the 17th of February. So we are now 2 days into it. But there it is. You see all that dark brown attacking the polar vortex low in the stratosphere that's up in northwestern Europe. There's a big upper high that's moving into the polar regions, which is what you normally see when you get into later April and May. And there we go. It weakens over the coming week. Another warming gets underway next weekend, late next week, and that attacks the polar vortex even more, and it just pretty much drifts the northern part of it into southern Siberia, China, I guess, and we're left with a pretty much destroyed-looking upper, way upstairs in the stratosphere. It's gone. You've got that's a high that's sitting over the North Pole.
Right.
So again, I don't know. I don't know that anybody knows what the implications of this are in terms of how disruptive is it. That's the big question, Joe, and that's what we don't know. And is how disruptive is this going to be to the lower part of the atmosphere? Is it going to couple and change the dynamic of the mid and low level pattern that we've been pretty much stuck in for the last 7 to 8 weeks? Or, the other possibility is, which I think is more likely, is that, yeah, it's going to change the pattern, but it may not change it to something, the pattern change you want and the pattern change you get. Maybe two different things. And now I've kind of switched over to that mid-level look, which suggests, at least according to the GFS, and actually the Europeans done this too, it gets very blocky. I mean, there's this Greenland high that, Greenland block forms, and it's got this is a very, very blocky look in the atmosphere. And okay, but you know what? Again, what is that going to mean? I don't know. I think it would mean colder, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be stormier. It might be stormier, but it may be stormier someplace other than where you are.
Right. Yeah. There's no what's the word I'm looking for? There's no like teleconnection between the stratosphere and the lower levels of the atmosphere. They're showing two completely different things. And this is the thing I think that has been frustrating Dr. Cohen. He's been relying, I mean, initially as we went into the winter season, and he's looking for the polar vortex and the splitting and saying, oh, well, this is going to mean, and oh, watch out now, here comes the cold air for and it doesn't happen. It right. Has not happened because what's been going on way upstairs has not been conducive to producing much of anything downstairs. And we've even got somebody like him who's apparently been studying this for, a long, long time, scratching his head saying, well, he has on a couple of occasions this winter, scratched his head and said outright on Twitter, quite frankly, I don't even know what this means. We'll just have to wait. We'll just have to watch and see. So,
well, we can look at Mrs. Ann Sambles, and the Ann Sambles would suggest that you've got this, you still have this relatively strong ridge off the southeast coast of the United States. We're just sort of like on the border of some colder air, and the trough is still wanting to be in the west. And for those of you who think I'm ignoring the other models, okay, they're not available. A lot of the stuff that's available for the GFS is not available for the Canadian. It's not available for the European. At least it's not available to me. No, it's not that I'm ignoring the other models. It's just that graphically, would you rather look at our faces that rather than look at a map, because that could certainly be arranged. This is the new GEFs. I'm pulling up the Canadian and sample. So again, let's go. Let's just to correct. I want to make sure I had the right maps up, because the GFS might have gone to the old GEFs.
And I hate to mention this, but we're 3 weeks away from the return of the dreaded daylight saving time, which means that the maps that are available to us right now will not be available in 3 weeks, because everything will be pushed forward 1 hour, and we won't even be able to see the very beginning of the GFS
Right.
once we go back on daylight saving time. So.
This was the 0Z ensemble. So what I was showing you before was actually the 12Z, which wasn't out far enough, which is where it showed the southeast ridge. That was my error. So actually, it's not terrible. Okay, it's not bad. But you still there's some ridging in the southeast, but it looks like the southeast ridge gets pretty flattened out to a large degree, if this is correct. But there's still more troughing in the west than there is in the east, so that's going to be somewhat problematic. I would say that the pattern on the pattern we may go into might not be as, how do I word this? The pattern right now for snow lovers is horrible. The pattern that we may be going into may be one where there might be room for a window, because with what we've been experiencing, there hasn't even been any room for a window to open up. And what little windows have opened up have brought down shots of cold air that have lasted 24 to 36 hours and gone. This is the Canadian from last night. Robert Russo, thank you for hitting super chats. Most appreciated. Here's the Canadian model, which has, again, it's not terrible. It does have maybe a slightly more favorable look to it. We can look at the European, the EPS, which I got to switch to the 0Z, and there you go. John Charles wants us to move the show to 12:30. I'm cooking pasta at 12:30, John. I got a pot of sauce on the stove, and I got a baked rigatoni that's got to go in the oven at 12:30. So that ain't happening. Anyway, here we go. So let's see what the EPS showed, and we'll roll that around. The EPS, you see the blocking there that does develop there in Scandinavia initially, and then starts to push west a little bit westward. Doesn't quite get there to Greenland, but it tries. And again, this is not a terrible pattern, but it's certainly better. It's a little more favorable than what we had. So there.
We've mentioned this. The winter of 82, 83, an El Nino winter, a very warm winter overall. And Dr. Cohen mentioned a couple of days ago in Twitter, he says, I'm thinking a lot about the megalopolitan storm of February 11th and 12th, 1983, which dumped 1 to 2 feet of snow from Washington up to Boston in a winter that was virtually non-existent. And I think he was pointing this out or bringing this up because he is hoping, Joe, as you just mentioned, that maybe, just maybe,
you get a window
in the coming days or weeks. You get a window.
You get a window.
That's how we got the 83 storm.
Right.
A window of cold air coinciding with not a very strong, but a modest system coming up along the eastern seaboard, which created all of that snow. And maybe there's still time, not a whole heck of a lot of time, but still time for a window to open up and for us to see that kind of scenario happen again here in the tri-state area.
Let's see. Robert Russo hit super chat. Thank you, Robert. Most appreciated. Did I mention earlier we had another super chat hit?
I see
Oh,
Frank
there.
Frank Frank Scalera.
Frank Scalera just popped up on my screen. Thank you, Frank. Most appreciated. Speaking of the screen, so what I've got up here, this is the last sea surface temperature map that was available. Let me see. Let me just freshen this up. So yeah, this is a new one they just put up, 18th. And we're going to look at the equatorial Pacific because what's left of the La Nina is continuing to erode. And if you notice, at the same time, we're seeing above normal temperatures along the west coast of South America up to the equator and to just off the coast of Central America. So an El Nino is developing now, or is beginning to develop. And gradually, we went from seeing anomalies here of temperatures that were 4 and 5 degrees below average uh, Fahrenheit, or maybe actually a little bit more, 3 to 4 degrees Celsius below average at the height of all of this, to now most of the area is generally about 1 to maybe a few pockets at most 2 degrees below normal, especially to the west of Hawaii and across the date line. But this area, every time I look at this map, Joe, every couple of days, this area keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and the area of above normal temperatures is expanding, expanding, expanding. And again, the idea that an El Nino is going to gradually overtake the Pacific. Now, how strong the El Nino is, I don't know. I don't care to forecast because that's not my thing. But look, it can't be any. The good news about this is the fact that if this is something that's going to continue through the summer and into fall, and that we're going to be sitting with an El Nino here next winter, it can't possibly be any worse for winter weather and snow lovers. So you could look at it that way. We just have a repeat performance of what we just had. Steve Lapointe, thanks for hitting Super Chat and reminding everybody that if you like the Joe and Joe Weather Show, hit the like button because we've got 64 likes. Thank you for those of you who have. Joe and I just love when we get to 100 likes. It makes us feel good.
And look how warm the water is right along the Gulf Stream here in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeastern states.
Oh yeah.
And you say to yourself, if we get any kind of a storm that, let's say, somehow moves off of Hatteras or the Virginia Capes and comes northward and interacts with that warm water, you're going to see an explosion of an exceedingly rapid deepening of the storm system. But again, in recent days, most of the big storms have been passing to the west of us, not out over the ocean.
Yep. And here's another thing. Again, now looking at the new GFS, which is out to, whoops, I didn't mean to do that. Oh, good Lord. Oh, I always forget. I accidentally made this thing full screen, and I always forget how to get it back the other way. Oh, exit full screen. There you go. The escape key didn't work. I was trying to make the picture a little bit bigger here.
The GFS is up to Karen Valentine right now, 222.
Oh, okay.
I used to watch that show, Room 222. That's the only reason why I ever watched that show in the late 60s and early 70s, Room 222, was to see Karen Valentine. And I have no idea where she is today, but she was worth watching on that show way back when. So there you go.
The EPO and the GFS, Tom Contino, is in general agreement. They're not exactly, they're not identical, but they're both close enough. Now, one thing I'm noticing on the new run, so this is actually a little bit encouraging, is if you look on the upper right in the reddish brown, that's the block. You got the blocking high developing over Scandinavia, and by the time we get to next Friday, Saturday, Sunday, you've got it starting to push in from Iceland toward Greenland. So that seems to be at least the impact of the stratospheric warming, that we're getting this blocking high that's going to develop. Now, again, does that change the overall flavor of what's going on in the West? Is it going to be enough to squash this? You don't want the South. By the way, everybody goes southeast ridge, and I get that. You don't want the southeast ridge to completely go away, because if it completely goes away, then what you wind up having is that you're so overwhelmed with the only way it completely goes away is if you get a deep trough, sort of like a broad bowl in the eastern part of the United States, and then you would be in you would be in a cold, dry airflow that won't have any room for any weather systems to have impact. So be careful what you wish for. Sal Patchy hitting super chat says the sauce should have been on and simmering before Sunday Mass. That's how it was in my mother's house. Anyway, enjoy your dinner. Actually, Sal, my sauce has been simmering since yesterday. I
Huh.
actually started making it yesterday in the morning. Okay, so I'm way ahead of you, and I totally get what you're saying. You are absolutely correct on that. So anyway, uh, I don't think there's much more that we can say other than uh, we'll watch to see what the models do and take us, what kind of adventures they take us. And I'm sure the 12Z run will have the obligatory snowstorm at 276 hours, which it has almost on every run, only for it to go away on the next one. And it might even do what it did yesterday, where I think on one run it had one at 276 and then one at like 360 or something. So you can expect that to continue. And on that note, Mr. Rayo, do you have Briller Jeopardy for today?
I believe I do. And if you just hang on for a second while I make my screen my screen a little smaller. And let's see, what am I looking for? Now my wife is going to come running down here with a glass of water for me, but no matter. I've got water handy. What am I looking here for? Oh, I see. All right, hang on. Scott Briller applying today's Briller Jeopardy. Actually, this dates back to Monday at 8:38 p.m. But we've only had time now with all that's happened this past week to both of us to get to Briller Jeopardy today. Here's today's Briller Jeopardy. The category average high temperature in February. And he's got 5 different places. So what is the average, Joe, in February, average temperature for Atlanta, Georgia? And again, I presume when he's talking about the average or mean temperature, it's between, the high and the low. So if you're thinking
Oh,
about,
okay.
if you think about 70 degrees in Atlanta, that would be the high. The low would be like, 50. So what would be the average or something along those lines?
So I would say 35, 59. So I would say the average temperature, the mean for the month is probably around 45. I'm going to say 45. Well, yeah, that's the other question. I mean, because there's a big difference
Oh,
between
wait a
the
minute.
beginning and the
Wait
end
a
of the
minute.
month.
Hold it.
Hold it.
Hold it. I read it. I read this wrong. I'm sorry about that. When I saw and he's got average in bold or uppercase letters. So when you see that, you figure it's the average or the mean temperature. But no, it is not. Today's Briller Jeopardy question category average high temperature in February.
Oh, okay.
So it's the average high temperature.
So
not the average.
I'll say 55.
Okay.
I'll say 55 for the average high temperature. I have to tell you, even though I live in Northeast Georgia and I'm only an hour and 45 minutes north of Atlanta, the weather here is so much different than what it is there in terms of, especially when it comes to temperatures. And there are days also where it's mostly sunny in Atlanta and it's cloudy and raw up here. So there's a huge difference. So I don't pay too much attention day to day to what's going on in Atlanta. So I just am guessing here. So I say 55.
Okay, well, we have actually 2 people on the chat board who got it right on the nose. One of our moderators, Tim Veltman, and also Ms. Spallerite. 58.
Okay.
58 degrees is the average high temperature in the month of February in Atlanta, Georgia.
All right, next.
Dallas, Texas.
Dallas, Texas. I will say for Dallas is kind of weird though because it's usually warm except when it isn't. Um, for the month of February, I'm going to say 62. 62.
Where's,
Oh, I
you
got
hear
it.
that?
I got it
You
right.
hear that? You got it right on the nose, Joe.
Oh, very good.
60,
62.
62
And
degrees.
so did
And
Timothy Veltman, 62.
I see a number of people like Sal Patchy got 68, Adam Lowe 62, Miss Spellerite again 62, Dennis Cassia 65, Chris O'Shaughnessy
63.
63. So if you were within a degree or two of 62, you were dancing around
Yes.
the correct answer there. So here's number 3 on the list, and it's Denver, the Mile High City, Denver,
Oh.
Colorado.
See,
Yeah, see?
that's a tough one because they could go from 50 to 0 at a blink of an eye. So, I'm going to say I'm going to take a chance here. I'm going to say 42.
Okay.
Okay.
And we have somebody on the chat board who has hit it again, right on the nose. Owen Daniel,
48.
48.
Yeah,
And Miss
because
Spellright, 48.
Denver is a very weird place because it's very common for them to be really warm on one day and then have snow and temperatures down in the single digits and below zero the next. So a lot of volatility there.
Next on the list, a place that we all know and love in the great state of New York, Central Park.
Ugh. Okay, so New York City, the average high for you start the month with the average high at around 38 or 9, and by the time we get to the end of the month, it's 44, 45. So I'm going to say 40. I'm going to say 42.
Where's the bell again? It did it again, Joe.
Yeah, it's 42. With
42.
and the same temperature too, also 42.
42 degrees. So here, the last one on the list, this may be the toughest of all, is Minneapolis, Mary Richards' hometown. Minneapolis.
Minneapolis.
Yes.
Okay, so Mini A P 1P. Minneapolis. So I'll say for Minneapolis. Uh, you're right. This is a tough one. For the month of February, I will say 30. I'll say 33.
I'm going to tell you right now, I was actually surprised by what Scott posted here for Minneapolis for the average high temperature in February.
Because it could get weird up there sometimes. Yeah, it could go to 20 or 30 below, but then it could get compensated by being 20 or 30 above average, depending on the circumstance. So
No, Robert Russo, no, not 4 degree.
no, it's not going to
Mark
be 4.
Mark Teixeira, 8.
No.
We're talking about the high temperature, not the average or even the low
And
temperature.
you know what? You look at the average snowfall in Minneapolis. It's not that much. It's not that much higher than the average snowfall in New York City. So in the New York City area, it's actually less than when you go just north of New York City, north and west of New York City, and north and east of New York City. It's actually less. Minneapolis. This train isn't going to Minneapolis. We're going in the opposite direction to the
Norfolk. That's for those of you who are into the honeymooners, you'll understand what that means. But gentlemen, we're not going to Minneapolis. We're going in the opposite direction to Norfolk, Virginia.
Yeah.
Well, David Carter has come about as close as anyone so far with his maybe 31. Yeah.
Maybe 31. So was I too high?
Well, what did you say? You said 33? Yeah, you were too high.
Too high. So we're talking what, 30 or 29?
Yes, you did 29.
29
is
Land of Goshen.
Yes.
All right, is that the last one for today?
That is it. That is it.
All right, let me just really quick. We're at 88 likes, so see if I take us over 100, folks. It would be nice. Um, okay, so we have an obligatory. Oh, it's one of these days where the GF, they're not the maps are not coming out in sequence. So he's out to 264, and at 264 there's a cold front coming through, and then it jumps to 282, and there's a low in northwest Mississippi with hardly any cold air here, and snow in Missouri and Oklahoma, Kansas. And then the next map that it's up there is the 318, which has minimal cold air. A cold front's already passed. This is Saturday, March 4th. The surface map is a big yawn. So, okay, I don't see the obligatory snowstorms yet on the GFS in the long range, although I'm sure there's still some of these missing maps will provide one. 6 more likes, 94. Can we get 6 more likes? So anyway, my day is done. I have sauce on the stove. I'm gonna make some. I got a baked rigatoni going in the oven, and I've got sauce meat, and I'm gonna make some. I had all this extra pizza dough that I made when I went on a pizza dough making binge and put it all in the freezer. So now I defrosted some of it, so I'm gonna make a pizza. Put a pizza in the oven, and my son-in-law and my grandsons will be here in about 2 hours. So I will have a nice afternoon.
And we're going to Grandpa's house. We're gonna have spaghetti or rigatoni.
Rigatoni. Oh, good God. All right, shall we say goodbye?
We're 4 shy of 100. How many people? 4 now with 3, 97.
Okay, because
3 more. Come on.
If you want the show to end, get us to 100. Okay.
Wait a minute, it just went from 97 to 96.
I know.
Come on.
Somebody who's not well brought up decided to take a like away. Do you want the show to end? Take us to 100 likes.
We want likes. We want likes. We want likes. What do I have to do?
By the way,
what do I have to do to get 3 more likes?
I have a windscreen now on my microphones because somebody. It's amazing the things that people get annoyed over. 101. Now I got
102.
Okay, good. All right. It's amazing what people. There's people that post comments on the show after it's off air, and I'm always amazed because they apparently these people are want to be producers, want to be directors, want to be audio technicians, on and on and on. You should do this, you should do that, you should do this, you should do that. And I know that we've had these periodic problems with audio and a few other things, but that's part of the nature of doing this. And I'm not technical when it comes to the TV technical stuff because we never had to do this on our own. It was always done, there were people who were hired just to do those things. But I bought a windscreen for this because I have a tendency to pop my peas. And apparently somebody was annoyed by the fact that I pop my peas. So it shouldn't happen anymore with the windscreen. And on that note, thank you, Anthony Spiraccio. We appreciate the kind compliment. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Thanks for the 106 likes. Those of you who have hit Super Chat, a special thanks to all of you. And we will be back tomorrow at 7:35 Eastern Time right here on the Joe and Joe Weather Show, which is brought to you by Omni True Value Hardware.
True Value.
Yes, at 1226 North Wellwood Avenue in West Babylon, New York, 631-756-1125. They're getting ready for spring. The website is omnitruevalue.com. So we'll see everybody tomorrow. Maybe we'll have something to talk about for Wednesday.
Maybe.
We'll see.
Maybe not.
Okay.
We'll see. All right, Joe.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.